Hey guys, so this is Reggie, and it seems like it has been forever since I have been able to create a video. But either way, I have been working through a few things, and it has just been startling how many times I have gotten stuck in my own journey and not known how to talk about things, or thought that it was better for me to keep them to myself. Even after I worked through something one time and realized the epiphany that I had held myself in bondage, falling into it again, not realizing that I was doing the same thing. I've also gotten a new camera, and well, I've had it for a little while now, but this is the first time I'm trying to do video, and it's been giving me a fun time with autofocus, so hopefully sound and focus works fine. Either way, as a result of learning of all the places that I may have been too quiet, I would like to share a little bit of story about a very long sabbatical of me not writing, my struggle with poetry, and probably dealing with who I am and who I am not. And I would like to talk also about some periods where I've had my own suicidal thoughts and depression and shame and just trying to escape myself, because I do know we don't talk about those things. So on the off chance that my story will help with someone else who is not talking, I want to share that with you now. So recently, I created an Instagram page dedicated to my poetry, and I did that because a lot of the poets that I follow, they have their own pages, and so you can scroll through and read it just like you're reading a book, which I thought was pretty cool. That only lasted for about 2 weeks though, because I have worked very hard to decompartmentalize my life, and it wasn't very long after posting I realized that there were things I was probably posting there that I wouldn't post somewhere else, and so it felt like a step backward, and I just didn't like it. So I guess there's good news and bad news in the fact that I might be sharing more of my poetry and more of my personal life on all of my regular platforms. But first, there are some things that I would like to tell you about my journey. So my very first poem was about a rabbit in the 4th grade. It was an assignment. We had to write something. I don't have it anymore. It was cute and corny from what I do remember. But the first poem that I ever wrote voluntarily, I was age 11. And I'm going to share it in this video, but it's kind of sad, especially when you think about a child writing it. And I just want to give you some context for basically, where all of that stuff started. Either way. So my parents separated when I was in the 4th grade. They eventually did get divorced. My father was in the Navy, and he was out to sea a lot on aircraft carriers, sometimes for years at a time. Their relationship was unhealthy while they were married, but the pain and hurt and anger that comes from divorce did not help anything at all. There was a lot of alcoholism and abuse in both of their relationships while they were together and after. And after their divorce, I didn't really talk to my father for about a 7-year span, with the exception of a weekend sandwiched in between there somewhere. My mother struggled with her own depression and shame and really couldn't find stability after that. I went to 18 schools between the 4th grade and my senior year of high school, which I did skip a grade, so that makes that span even more smushed together. And we moved 38 times in that span of 7 years, and most of that was all before high school. I only went to 3 high schools. Either way, I am an only child. I often felt disconnected to my parents. I also learned to detach from people because there was a really good chance you probably weren't going to be in my life in the next 3 months anyway. And so it was just, I guess, a coping mechanism for me. And because that also made it a little bit more challenging to develop friendships. So if you know me at all, sometimes I'm incredibly socially awkward, much better than I used to be. And thankfully, I think I'm growing a lot more through that now. But I don't really remember having a lot of childhood friends or going places or having people come over, which isn't necessarily a big deal to me now, but that's just part of my story. So I distinctively remember becoming less sentimental about things because I just got tired of moving stuff. And so I'd just go ahead and throw away whatever it is now. I can't say that we were ever homeless, but there was a time that we did sleep in cars or trucks in between transitions. We also lived in a house that was going to be condemned because it was rent-free. And while a lot of that stuff covers like a very painful period of my life, living in that house was actually a section that I was really fond of because we were submersed in the forest, and I discovered it and would lose myself in it for hours, and the trees became my friends. Either way, I don't like to use the word trauma because it sounds so much stronger than what I feel is necessary for my life, but any situation that you can't process leaves a traumatic impact. So there were countless situations that I froze in because I had no idea what to do or how to handle them, and I just got stuck and stayed there. And sometimes it still happens. Or I mask it with anger because I just needed whatever it was to stop and go away. And sometimes being angry just helps that happen. Either way, when I look up the definition of emotional processing, it says it is the ability of people to process stress and other extreme events or move past them. And when people are unable to process those emotions, they develop phobias and other mental issues. Emotional processing allows a specific and intense feelings to dissipate over time. The more that you try to isolate those parts of yourself or try to separate yourself from them, or the more quiet you try to become about them, the louder that voice of shame grows internally. And none of us are born knowing how to deal with all of the things that we encounter in life. We all develop coping mechanisms, attachments, patterns, self-protective layers, all known as ego. So as for that poem, know first that my family also calls me by my middle name, which is Lucienne, if you pronounce it correctly, but we're a little bit hillbilly. We're on the Florida-Alabama border, so we all say Lucienne. And if you ever read the text of this poem, you might not think it rhymes, but it does, if you say it our way. So anyway, the poem was called My Life. I have a job, I have a home, I have some room, but none to roam. I have a life I want to live, I have my love I cannot give. I have my pain I cannot share. I have my world that doesn't care. I have a name that proves I am a lonely girl. My name's Lucienne. So that's the first real step that I made into the writing world. I didn't write again for a couple years. I'm not sure what provoked that or why it stopped or if it was just a whim. Either way, my writing stuff started in high school. I was about 15. I was struggling still with feeling so disconnected from people, whether it was abandonment or loneliness, I'm not sure. And a lot of my writing was like monologue sadness, which is probably why I don't like it much now. Just the maturity level, and then there really wasn't a lot of form to it. Some of it rhymed, some of it didn't, but it just felt like a pool of flood words. Of sadness. So anyway, I tell you this because that sense of belonging and not fitting in and not being worthy of attention or love or friendship or someone else's time struck me at such an early age. I wish that I could tell you that I outgrew it quickly or that my poetry suddenly became better, but it wasn't. And I'm a terrible poet. I mean, sometimes it's lucked out in my favor later on in life, but I can't say that that has been historically true. By age 16, it was a particularly dark period. I had a brief stint where I was borderline suicidal. It was very scary and a very strange experience. Now, I don't really want to be too graphic here, but I am going to take a little bit of a detour. Because of the nature of that conversation and knowing how little I wanted to talk about it, I do want to speak to that now in case someone else is watching it. So, I used to fantasize about sticking a double-barrel shotgun in my mouth. I don't even know if we owned one. I can't say that I was looking for one. I just randomly started having these thoughts one day. And I never really thought that other people's lives would be better without me, but I did start to think that that might be the only way that I ever find peace. I didn't actually want to die, but I had no idea what to do with these thoughts. I didn't know where they came from. I didn't know what provoked them to start coming on, and I didn't want to talk about it because I knew that the minute that you say that, people have two reactions. They either think you want attention or they have this overwhelming amount of I want to save you from something. And I didn't feel like it really applied to me because I didn't know what provoked them in the first place. And I just didn't want that kind of attention, and I didn't want to scare anybody else or make them down. When they started picking up with frequency, I did eventually talk to a counselor at school because I had no idea how to stop them. They thrust me into an emergency counseling situation, and it was also requested that I stay with a friend for a few weeks. I don't know much about spiritual activity, but I do believe that people can be tormented by things that are inside of them and something with outside of them on a spiritual level. You know, Proverbs 13:16 tells us that hope deferred will make a heart sick. And we can see that here, that sometimes, we're not happy, or we are in situations where we feel like we can't be happy until X, Y, or Z happens, and we feel completely powerless to what we can do now to change our situation or handle our response to that. If I have learned anything since that time, that when you fantasize about dying, or when you fantasize about someone else dying, or how much better your life will be when that job ends, or that relationship ends, or that habit ends, instead of shaming yourself for how you feel and being too afraid to talk about it, Karla McLaren says in her book, The Language of Emotions, that your soul is simply trying to tell you that you need to stop that thing that is bringing about those thoughts. You either need to end your interaction with it or change your relationship to it. That there is something in your life that is crushing your soul. You don't need to end anyone's life in order to change that. Changing my environment did help for a brief period of time, immensely. I often wonder if people that do wind up taking their own lives are those who also had these thoughts and didn't want to die but didn't know what to do about them, and then eventually the thoughts just got too loud and too pressing. If you happen to be in that place, you are not broken, you are not weird, you are not a downer because this is happening. Your psyche might really be trying to tell you something about your environment or something going on in your life. And when you can unpack that and really take the time to speak to someone about it, you can get help and find peace. I promise you that you do not have to have those kind of thoughts the rest of your life. And there are things that you can do about it that don't turn into big affairs. And so for that, I am going to put the suicide hotline in this video. But please get help for that. There is nothing wrong with you, and there is nothing wrong with needing help working through that. But make sure it's a professional that can guide you the right way. As for me, it would be years before I could change some of the things that I needed to change. I self-protected and probably self-sabotaged some things to keep that protective layer. But no matter how many times I moved or whatever was going on, I could always find a pen and paper. My poetry reflected a lot of that. By 22, I had created a book, 150 pages, all bound and copywritten, titled No Room in Me, because I was so full of this dead weight that I just felt shut down. I couldn't take in anything else. I didn't know how to contribute to anything either. Either way, I never really did anything with it because of its tone and its immaturity. It just didn't feel like a part of my life I wanted out there in the world. I continued writing for a few more years, but stopped writing altogether in 2004 by age 25. I remember the last poem. I didn't remember the words at the time, but I remember writing it. I remember making the decision to stop. Everything that I always wrote was so sad. That's me comparing myself to other people and how gifted some writers might be with the rhyming, with their happiness, with the way that they can make ordinary things sound so majestic and beautiful and awing. And so at that time, I wasn't in that place, and I was comparing what I did to someone else. I didn't see that then, but either way, so often we hear that we have to choose our feelings and that we can't just live by them. And I sincerely and genuinely wanted to be a happier person. So if my writing was sad, then I was going to choose to be happy, and that had to go. So I closed the book, and it felt like a really strange fate and this weird wall of resolve, literally, that I could feel physically, as I just had this attitude, like, let's pony up and do this. It would be 12 years before I picked up the pen again in 2016. But even then, there was this weird disassociation, like everything I was writing was separate from me. In many ways, I also felt separated from myself. In 2017, when my husband and I finally separated, I picked up that journal and read that last entry that I had written, and every single word stung. It felt exactly like the moment that I was in. It was kind of surreal and raw, and I didn't really understand how that was or why it was. Later, I realized that when I closed that book, I had inadvertently gone numb. I have been writing ever since. What's crazy is that it never occurred to me that I was numb. I am a fiery kind of girl. I'm loud. I have strong emotions, and I thought I was feeling them. I knew many of them were there, but they were in my head, and I couldn't feel them drop down into my heart. In that span of years, there were periods of time that I had a pretty good idea that I was depressed, but I kept thinking it was just a season. And if I could just push through, I mean, don't we often hear that in church, that God tells you that you will never always be happy? After all, the great apostle Paul had a thorn he couldn't get rid of. Maybe all these things were my thorns, and I just needed to persevere and keep the faith and weather the storm. I thought I was handling it. But even when we're handling things to the best of our abilities and doing a fine job keeping ourselves together, depression changes the way that we interact with others. And while you think that you may be handling you, the way it affects you might be hurting others. And to give that some context, if you're sleeping an unusual amount of time, whether it's too little, which they say under 4 to 6 hours, you are technically drunk, whether or not you feel that way. And I heard recently that your brain will eat itself in a very limited number of hours. I don't know if that's true, but back it up. Either way, if you're sleeping too less, too little, too much, if you're working too little, working too much, not interacting with your family or isolating yourself, drinking too much, addictions, you understand all of this, angry and yelling, all of those things, while we think we've got it, it affects the people that we are around. I remember sitting on my recliner in the house one day and I was so overwhelmed with life. I was working full time, trying to be a mom and a wife, trying to be active in church and to be a volunteer and to do God knows what, because I wanted to do my part and be the best human being I could possibly be. And my house was a mess and it seemed like no one else cared and it kept getting dirty again. And I made the decision that something in my life had to go, and cleaning seemed like the only thing that could possibly be it. And I remember just sort of surrendering to this is just the way it is for now and the way that it has to be. Now, thankfully, as the years have gone on, I have gotten more creative. I am not going to tell you I started cleaning my house because I only have about this much time to create, and I would much rather make a mess than make anything neat. If you see anything that looks clean behind me, it's only because we're on YouTube. I could take you through a tour of my house. Either way, I didn't realize it, but that was a coping mechanism for me at the time. And I had to check out of something. While I wasn't writing poetry for a while, I did write about my faith. I spent a lot of time in study, sharing blogs. There is no doubt that God got me through that hard time. There is no doubt that that season grew me and allowed me to practice listening to myself and God, and I would never tell you that a moment of that time or my storm was a waste. But because there was an online presence, there was also a bit of a spiritual ego in place. And maybe me feeling like I had to do this thing, whether or not I had to do it at all, maybe I also disappeared behind the important work because I didn't know how to handle what was happening in my real life. Even though I was doing everything I could to handle it, I didn't know how to deal with the fact that nothing was changing. Either way, so I felt stuck. It reminds me of the passage in Matthew 23:7 that says, "You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside they are full of dead men's bones and everything unclean." And if you read that whole passage, it sounds a little bit harsher. I don't think that most of us intend to check out. It's either trying too hard to do things a certain way that we don't realize we're bypassing the deeper work, or that we're so numb and overwhelmed that we are simply out of touch with it. I am not convinced that it's done intentionally or maliciously, but our culture, our media, social media, it all feeds this superficial, sensational aspect of life. I mean, even the angry on TV evokes emotion in us that makes us feel connected. And so we feel like we're connecting to something, but it hardly reflects living at all. So I'm going to read you a very long passage out of Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer. I don't know if you can, I turned my autofocus off. You can't see that. Either way, it's by Parker Palmer, Let Your Life Speak. And he talks about his own spiritual transformation and his bouts of depression. And I don't remember all of it because it's been probably since 2015 since I read it. But either way, I want to share with you this passage. The altitude at which I was living had been achieved by at least 4 means. First, I had been trained on an intellectual level not only to think, an activity I greatly valued, but also to live largely in my head, the place in my human body farthest from the ground. Second, I had embraced a form of Christian faith devoted less to the experience of God than to my abstractions about it. A fact that now baffles me. How did so many disembodied concepts emerge from a tradition whose central commitment is to the Word became flesh? Third, my altitude had been achieved by my ego, an inflated ego that led me to think more of myself than warranted in order to mask my fear that I was less than I should have been. Finally, it had been achieved by my ethic, a distorted ethic that led me to live by images of who I ought to be or what I ought to do, rather than by insight into my own reality, into what was true and possible and life-giving for me. For a long time, the oughts had been the driving force in my life, and when I failed to live up to those oughts, I saw myself as a weak and faithless person. I never stopped to ask, how does such and such fit my God-given nature? Or is such and such truly my gift and my call? As a result, important parts of the life that I was living were not mine to live and thus doomed to fail. Depression was, indeed, the hand of a friend trying to press me down to the ground onto which it was safe to stand. The ground of my own truth, my own nature, with its complex mix of limits and gifts, liabilities and assets, darkness and light. Eventually, I developed my own image of the befriending impulse behind this depression. Imagine that from an early in my life, a friendly figure standing in a block away was trying to get my attention by shouting my name, wanting to teach me some hard but healing truths about myself. But I, fearful of what I might hear, or arrogantly trying to live without help, or simply too busy with my ideas and ego and ethics to bother, ignored the shouts and walked away. So this figure, still friendly with intent, came closer and shouted more loudly. But I kept walking, even closer as it came, close enough to tap me on my shoulder. But I walked on. Frustrated by my unresponsiveness, the figure threw stones at my back and struck me with a stick, still wanting simply to get my attention. But despite the pain, I kept walking away. Over the years, the befriending intent of this figure never disappeared, but became obscured by the frustration caused by my refusal to turn around. Since shouts and taps and stones and sticks had failed to do the trick, there was only one thing left: drop the nuclear bomb called depression on me. Not with the intent to kill, but with a last-ditch effort to get me turn around and ask the simple question, what do you want? When I was finally able to make that turn and to start to absorb and act on the self-knowledge that then became available to me, I began to get well. The figure calling to me all those years, I believe, was what Thomas Merton calls true self. This is not the ego self that wants to inflate us or deflate us, another form of distortion. Not the intellectual self that wants to hover above the mess of life in clear but ungrounded ideas. Not the ethical self that wants to live by some abstract moral code. It is the self planted in us by the God who made us in God's image. The self that wants nothing more or less than for us to be who we were created to be. True self is a true friend. One ignores or rejects such friendship only at one's peril. This book was a great book the whole way through, and that passage that I just read you, while it may have taken me a long time to get through some of that on my own, I can tell you that everything that he just said is exactly what I have experienced myself. Folks, I was 38 the first time that I had ever felt peace in my life. In my return to writing, I have sat with my anger and been okay with bad poetry and scary feelings. And there were lots of times I was so proud of myself I didn't eat my way through them or drink myself through them or some other coping mechanism or distraction. There were some slips, but for the most part, the last couple of years, I have worked with them. If you never saw, and when you look around the world, it is so scary because I had no idea how sad or detached or hurt I was. And when I think about it, it scares me because so many people around us don't know the depth of that either. If you've never seen a healthy relationship though, how would you know how to make one or recognize it if you saw one? And if you never saw people that loved themselves, how would you ever learn to love yourself? What if what you knew of happy was only a numb and seemingly plainless plateau? How would you ever know that there was something greater out there? And if you knew that you had strong emotions, how would you know that you weren't feeling them out, as in all the way out of you? You know, my word this year has been integration, and I always love those word challenges because you kind of don't know where it's going to take you. But for me, this is integrating this part of my life letting it come out and breathe and be who and what it is, because it is also a part of me, along with many other truths that will come to fruition and probably be shared. And I'm not going to do it on separate pages. I won't have a separate page for poetry. So I have to fair warn you that many of the things you may see come out of me might be from that sad and lonely teenager. It might be from an angry adult. It might be some really good, happy, rhymey, successful things. But a lot of it's raw, and some of it's racy, and some of it might be uncomfortable or offensive. And if we only show our romantic and pretty sides or our picture-perfect living rooms and always hold back our tears, how does anyone ever learn to accept another human if we can't accept those parts of ourselves? You know, I always thought that Matthew 16:24, where it says to take up your cross and follow me, meant to shoulder that burden, to pick up that pain that I carried every day to follow God, so that I could remember and be reminded that I was a sinner. And I do believe that it means that to some degree, but not necessarily in a shaming way. Here lately, though, I think it means more that we can expose all of the things that we are going to be crucified for and follow God in whatever capacity He wants us to use those things. Now, please do that with a lot of prayer and meditation on your own about the right time for that. I am not telling you right this minute to go spill your beans on social media or with everybody you know. But this is the part of my journey that I'm on. It can also be so hard to get our thoughts right. And even when I did my best to put on the mind of Christ and memorize scripture and tell myself all the affirmations and things that I could or should be doing, while they did help in some ways, there were other areas that became bound in legalism and shame. Just like Parker said, with all those oughts and feeling like he was failing by not ever mastering them, I felt the same with all my shoulds, the things I should have said, the things I should have done, why I behaved the way I did. Scripture tells us that Jesus incarnated himself to save us, that a divine being became human and then completely died before he could be resurrected. Now, I am not a theologian, and I did not go to any school, so please read your Bible for yourself and don't take my word for anything. And even when you follow your favorite or the best of the best, still read your Bible for yourself. But maybe putting on the mind of Christ doesn't mean memorizing all of the rules. Maybe it means that we have to return to our own humanity and feel our way through to redemption and to the divinity within. So it's not just a whitewashed wall, but a whitewashed soul as well. And that maybe dying to self wasn't really intended to make you think that your wants or your needs were less important than everyone else, but that we were to die to that fabricated portion of ourselves and all the things we thought we had to be. But look how young it starts in each of us. That poem was age 11, and I have read studies that say that it starts as early as the age of 3. Who knows? And no wonder it is so hard to learn who we are and where we begin and what is and is not us. Either way, most of us know John 3:16, that for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. But the verse right after that in 17 says that he came to save and not judge or condemn the world. And I think that's important because he knows that some really ugly stuff is going to come out of you and I when we start to share our stories. And that's okay, because it's not the only part of the story, and it's not the last word that he wants it to have. So, I am going to talk about writing and its importance. I know that you probably don't want to write anything down or talk to anyone about it. And if you are afraid of someone else seeing this thing that you might put out there, even if it's locked behind a screen and typed on a computer, if you don't want somebody else to see it, there's a really good chance you're probably not dealing with it. And there are countless studies that talk about the benefits of writing. Additionally, some of the most successful people in the world say that they spend time journaling. And I know you don't have time for it. Who does? But self-reflection and writing is not only cathartic, it has become such a significant part of my own spirituality that I swear I feel like it's a superpower. It has become like this incubator for my intuition, which has turned psychic. And I'm not telling you this to brag about some gift that I think I have. I'm telling you this because it has been that important that yes, I think everybody needs to write. I am not convinced that it is just for people that were born to be writers. And if the world was created by words, and if the word became flesh and turned human, then maybe your own divinity and creation may also be hiding in what you will or won't say. And what if the fact that you hold all of those things in and so tight and refuse to put them out there helps you instead create a world that never relieves you of your suffering because you have chosen to hold on to them instead? Now, I don't know how to tell you to acclimate to emotional processing because I'm still trying to figure out whether or not I'm doing it correctly. I'm going to put links in the bottom of this message and some other references, and I'm going to tell you a few things that have helped me. But I've heard that it's a lot like acclimating to a hot bath. At first you dip your toe in and then you pull it out because it's too hot. And then you try again, and eventually you get a little acclimated, so you stick it in deeper and deeper, and you get the rest of your body in there until you can adjust to the heat. And the more you consciously connect to this pain and the heat within you, the more you empty that bucket of pain that you have been carrying around. A few of the other things that have helped me is that to try and really feel something in your heart and not just analyze why it is or why it's there or how it got there or who you learned that from or how you unlearn it. Like really just stop and feel what it is. Number two, if you're telling yourself how you should feel and what you should be doing or what you ought to be doing, try asking yourself how you do feel and what's already happening, what's going on with you. And then ask yourself, what do you need in that moment? What do you need in your life to change? And if that stuff can't change, how can you change yourself in response? And how would you change that response if it never changes at all? And then just practice journaling around those things. Practice naming your emotions. You can look up a feeling wheel. I'll put a link down below for that as well. You know, there are arrays to anger and arrays to sadness and joy and all these other different emotions. And there are levels to each one. And the next time you get triggered by something, maybe go through and try and pinpoint, you know, is it frustration? Is it apathy? Is it anger? Is it resentment? And name why you feel each one of those things. I know it sounds like a lot, but it really does help. And another thing too, I am going to put a little grid at the bottom, at the end of the screenshot, just with like what it looks like when you're going through some of those processes. But another thing I'll tell you is if you have some sort of hobby, if you can create something throughout this process, the pain will become so much more bearable. I don't know how or why it works that way, but it does. And it doesn't matter how good or bad you do something. There's a reason why you are into it, just like me writing poetry. Maybe it's more about the process than it is the finished product. And maybe it really is part of your own spiritual practice and not really about you ever having a product at all. Just give yourself, and I say this because I know so many women that won't take a class by themselves, or they won't start a new hobby on their own, or they always say they have no talent. When most of the time, I don't think people even try learning something new to discover if they have talent. But I have played guitar poorly. I've tried to pick it up, and I just don't have time for it. I have done stained glass until I realized that I hated puzzles. I tried knitting and crochet, and I hated those as well. There's nothing wrong with changing your mind and deciding you don't like something. So for all the women that recognize any of that in them, just give yourself permission this year, and this goes for men too if you struggle with that same issue, but just give yourself permission to find a process of creating something that you enjoy without the pressure of what it looks like in the end. And it's okay if you have to go through 20 this year or through the next 5 years to find the thing that's you. You might be blown away to discover that all the 10 things you picked, God uses a mixture of that in the end. Either way, that's a bit of a bunny trail. But I hope that somehow this story of me trying to shed me and then come back to me, along with Parker Palmer and us not knowing ourselves. You know, if you're in that place, if you're depressed, if you're full of shame or regret, and if you're struggling with suicidal thoughts, I just hope you know that there is a way out. I don't know that I have all the answers, but there is a way out, and I will continue praying for you, and I would help anybody any way that I could. I'll put links in the bottom of things you can look into. And I just hope that you feel like you can get some traction again in your life by putting some of these things into play. because there really is a lot of good in life. We are not created to only live in suffering, I don't believe. Either way, I love to close in prayer, and I love to share scripture. I'm going to do things a little bit differently this time. I'm going to share with you a prayer from someone who struggled with the same thing in the Bible. So this is going to be the Psalms 143, and it is written by David, and he's praying to God about his depression and all that he feels right then. And when I read it, it's going to be a blend of NIV and the Amplified version if you start trying to look them up. But first, my commentary says that David's prayer was taught to do God's will, not his own. A prayer for guidance is self-centered if it doesn't recognize God's power to redirect our lives. Asking God to restructure our priorities awakens our minds and stirs our will. And that's an important thing to note, because just because you decide that you want to change something right now does not mean that you are going to feel like wanting to change it tomorrow or the next day or the next day. I think we all just need help getting through changing our life when we're ready to. But if you'd like to close your eyes through this, please do so, or you can watch or read along. But either way, I'm going to read this now. Psalms 143. Lord, hear my prayer and listen to my cry for mercy. In your faithfulness and righteousness, come to my relief. Do not bring your servant into judgment, for no one living is righteous before you. The enemy pursues me. He crushes me into the ground. He makes me dwell in the darkness like those long dead. So my spirit grows faint within me, and my heart grows numb within my bosom. I remember the days of long ago. I meditate on all of your works and consider what your hands have done. I spread out my hands to you. I thirst to you like a parched land. Answer me quickly, Lord. My spirit fails. Do not hide your face from me. I will be like those who go down into the pit of despair. Let the morning bring me your word of your unfailing love, for I have put my trust in you. Show me the way that I should go, for to you I entrust my life. Rescue me from my enemies, Lord, for I hide myself in you. Teach me to do your will, for you are my God. May your good spirit lead me on level ground. For your name's sake, Lord, preserve my life. In your righteousness, bring me out of trouble. In your unfailing love, silence my enemies. Destroy all those who afflict my inner self, for I am your servant. Amen. I really don't know how to end it other than that, except that I hurt because I know so many other people hurt too. And I won't dare sit here and tell you that my life is suddenly perfect. Because it's not. And in a lot of ways, it is so much more messy now than it ever was. But I feel it. And just like Brene Brown says, that when you numb your joy, you numb your pain, you numb your joy, it is so true. And when you allow yourself to start feeling that darker stuff again, you also feel the lighter as well. And it has just been profound. And I pray that for anybody that's watching that needs it. And I hope it helps. Go to God. There are tons of scriptures in the Bible. He wept. He was angry. He questioned. I don't have them all in front of me. But Jesus went through a lot of the same emotions that we did. And our God knit us together. He understands every single one. And he didn't create us for no reason or only for suffering. And I pray that encourages you. I wish that everybody knew what it is. I think I know now. And I hope God rocks your world. Thank you, friend. Bye.